This week on Cosmic Sponge, we start with our news segment where we discuss a new book about real exorcisms written by a real priest, followed by a story about Air Force veterans who reveal UFO secrets. Then we discover a new UFO research lab in Japan, which you can join for a mere 10,000 yen. For our main segment, we reveal a UFO sighting made in New Zealand more than a decade before the famous Kenneth Arnold encounter. Then we discuss the dangers of transporting a Goatman in your car. And finally, we learn about a super emu that once roamed the New Zealand landscape, standing up to 14 feet tall and undoubtedly tasting like chicken. All this and more coming right up. Stick around. It's gonna be a good one.
Welcome to Cosmic Sponge, the podcast where we talk about UFOs and other weird wonders in the world. I'm Stephen Hawk.
And I'm Jimmy Coe.
Tonight, we are going back down under. And you know what? I'm just not even going to try the accent.
Oh, thank God.
You know, I do it so badly, there's no point in even trying.
Yes, you do. But it's going to be weird hearing you not say, "Dingo ate my baby."
That's your line. That's your line.
You seem to like it more than me.
I do like it. Tango ate my baby.
There you go.
I couldn't resist.
I knew you
Especially
couldn't.
after you said it. I don't think they have dingoes in New Zealand, do they?
No, I don't know. I don't think they have anything in New Zealand.
The reason I'm saying that is because tonight we will be talking about strange occurrences in New Zealand.
Cool. I can't wait.
And they kind of talk like people from Australia that have dingoes. And if you're from New Zealand, write into the show, firstcontact@cosmicsponge.com. Let us know, do you have dingoes in New Zealand?
Or post on our Facebook page. Let us know. Dingoes.
But before we get into that, there's a couple of things I want to talk about. One is the contest just ended, and we had a really nice turnout for it. We were really surprised with how many entries we did get. Because we are recording this a couple of days early, we still don't know who the winner is. Technically, as we're recording this, the contest is still going, but by the time you hear it, it will be over. That confuse you or anything, Jimmy?
Yeah, I'm always confused.
So anyway, by the time you hear this, the contest will be over. Next week, on next week's show, we will be announcing the winner. So thanks for everyone that sent an entry in for this contest. I'm looking real forward to handing out some great prizes. Jimmy, what have you been up to this week?
My head's shiny.
Yeah, I noticed you shaved.
I did. Yeah, not much. I've been looking around for some interesting stories. You know, as Halloween gets closer, I'm always looking for something dealing with the spooky or supernatural. I was lucky. I stumbled across several things, but I found one in particular I wanted to share with everybody. It's a new book that just came out. And when I say just came out, I think it came out around August, September timeframe, so pretty recently. It is The Diary of an American Exorcist by Stephen Rossetti. He's a priest and well-known exorcist. Now, there's another book that they reference in here as well that I'm not familiar with called The Devil's Afraid of Me, The Life and Works of the World's Most Famous Exorcist by Gabriel Amorth. Amorth. I think I'm saying that right. A famous Catholic priest.
How do you spell it?
I'm not doing this with you today. You're not going to trick me. I'm not spelling anything in this episode, which is going to be hard because we have a lot of words that are not native to my West Virginian background.
Okay. Well, we'll see. We'll see if you can make it.
I'm going to. So he was a famous Catholic priest who wrote this second book, The Devil's Afraid of Me, and he performed scores of exorcism over his lifetime. However, this new book by Rossetti it's essentially a diary that goes through all of his experiences, and it comes with some pretty good credentials. He has a doctorate and is a research associate professor at the Catholic University of America in Washington. He's a licensed psychologist.
Does he teach exorcism?
I would imagine he does, since he is so prolific.
Or demonology, perhaps.
Maybe he does. There's a little excerpt here where he talks about what demons are from his perspective, being fallen angels. And angels, like all creatures created by God, were created to have loving relationships with God. and unfortunately they reject it. As a consequence, they go to the dark side. And then if we leave ourselves open, they can come in and possess us and make us do all kinds of wacky things like that chicken dance.
This guy would be the one that if you're making a horror movie, let's say you're in a horror movie, you're about halfway through or maybe third of the way through the movie, and you've already seen how all the monsters work and how they're terrorizing the family. This would be the guy you would go to the university and plead your case to. Please come look at our house. Right?
Yes.
You would walk in right as he's finishing up a class in one of those,
Yeah, that's how the scene would certainly play out. And he even mentions here that they can possess an object, such as a cursed occult artifact. They can possess a place.
Perhaps a doll like Annabelle.
Yeah, exactly. So, those dolls down in Adams, Tennessee with the Bell Witch? Could be a demon possessing them.
Maybe.
Creepy stuff, man.
Maybe demons possess the rocks. I thought they're cursed, though. What's the difference? Cursed. Is a demon in a cursed object? Or is it just cursed?
He mentions they can, this is a quote from him, they can possess an object such as a cursed occult artifact.
Okay. Well, there you go.
Yeah. So
I got a story for you.
Hit me.
So I found a story. This is on military.com. And the headline is Air Force veterans who are UFO true believers return to newly attentive Washington. A few years ago, Stephen Greer put together like a big meeting. He's done it several times at the press club. Apparently they've returned to the press club recently because, obviously the United States government seems to be paying more attention to the UFO threat or the UFO phenomena, let's say. The story is UFOs have tampered with our nuclear silos. And so now that they feel that Congress and the Senate are paying attention, they want to, bring more attention to this. They think maybe somebody will listen to them now. There was 3 Air Force veterans. They came to Washington, D.C., and they all had strange stories. One veteran was piped in to the press club with a video feed. All of them share one central claim that in the 1960s, UFOs tampered with nuclear weapons managed by the United States Air Force, both terrifying and mystifying the airmen who experienced these encounters. Some of these men remained silent for decades. David Schindel, a retired captain who served as a nuclear missile launch control officer at Minot Air Force Base in North Dakota, said, I waited 40 years before I opened my mouth, and that's a long time. I had this terrible secret on my mind for all that time, and I felt such great relief to finally admit to my friends and close relatives what I experienced in the Air Force. Other accounts, such as the story told by Robert Salas, now he's the one, you see him interviewed. He said there was a glowing red-orange craft hovering at the gate of a Minuteman intercontinental ballistic missile silo in Montana, and that during that encounter, it shut down all of the silos on the base that weren't connected.
Yeah, they were 9 total, and they were all independent systems, so completely separate from one another, no interactions whatsoever. All 9 got shut down after this sighting.
So Salas apparently has spent years gathering other Air Force veterans who have signed witness affidavits describing their own encounters decades ago. He claims the evidence shows UFOs appeared at various times and took 20 ICBMs offline at sites in the central U.S. over an 8-day period. Never had we seen a situation like this before, Schindel said. Now, Schindel said that he and his commander visited a missile launch site near Minot, as I said earlier, in September of 1966, and 8 airmen there told him that 10 missiles at the silos in the vicinity all went down with guidance and control malfunctions when an 80 to 100 foot wide flying object with bright flashing lights had hovered over the site. Salas, who was the first lieutenant stationed at Malmstrom Air Force Base in Montana in 1967, said he was on duty as a deputy missile combat crew commander deep in the underground nuclear missile control room. The site's flight security officer called from above ground and was panicked and shouting. He said there was a large, glowing, pulsating red oval-shaped object hovering over the front gate. As he woke his commander, he claims alarms went off, showing nearly all 10 missiles shown in the control room had been disabled. Robert Jacobs, who attended the UFO press conference via the video link from Missouri, said he was first lieutenant in the Air Force station at Vandenberg Air Force Base in California in 1964 when he was asked to set up a telescope video camera to capture an Atlas rocket test. He claims the video showed a disc-shaped craft flew up to the dummy warhead as it traveled at about 8,000 miles per hour over the Pacific Ocean, circled it, and shot it with several beams of light. It went around, this is a quote, it went around the top of the warhead, fired a beam of light down on top of the warhead, and then flew out of the frame the same way as it had come.
Can you imagine being outside of a nuclear missile site, guarding the gate? Beneath you, couple of men who are responsible for launching these things.
Right.
Ending all life as we know it, probably. And you're up at this gate, and you've popped a couple of pills. Maybe one of your friends gave you some mystery pills. And then all of a sudden, you see this large, glowing ball of mystery in the sky. I mean, hey, guys, I'm seeing this thing up here. It's this big, glowing orange thing. Bob, have you been popping pills again? Well, just two. I don't know.
I mean, really, in all seriousness, there's several reports that seem very similar. And I know I think that one of these stories, or maybe both of them, I think the one about the missile being shot with the beams
I've seen that before.
In one of James Fox's films, if not both of them.
Mm-hmm.
Salas most definitely was in one of those films talking about it. And I do know they found the CIA documentation where the report was made that a UFO appeared over one of these bases. I believe it was the one in Montana. They have documentation that shows that there was a report of a UFO and that the missiles malfunction.
Yeah, so let me ask you this, okay? If you have nuclear missiles going offline and you have credible witnesses, we're talking military personnel, captain in the Air Force, and not just one case, several cases happening over years. If you have this going on over and over again, and you're not taking this to the next level as a government agency, investigating it, taking steps to put in some monitoring over these sites so that if it happens again, you've captured that information and you can get closer to understanding essentially what a threat would be, because they're taking off our ability to defend ourselves. So if you're not doing that, it either there's some gross incompetence going on in the government, or they already know what it is.
Right. I don't know that they know what it is. I'm still not convinced that we have crash saucers and some of that. But I think they're aware of these reports. But on the other hand, what do you do? Right? Okay, I mean, this happened. It was an isolated incident. If it was happening over and over, or at the same place over and over, maybe you would take some kind of measures. But these things get reported. They went down, but what do they do about it?
Hey, we buy wrenches. We buy wrenches for the military. It costs $10,000. They can spend a little bit of that money that they print to, put monitoring systems around these silos and sites.
And they may have them. They're not going to share that information with it. I mean, the CIA or whoever.
Well, maybe not with you, but
right. Well, I mean, they're not going to share them with the public. No, they would share it with you.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I have a Cthulhu doll. It makes me special.
I'm still going to go out and get one of those so I can get to the bottom of this story. All right. Well, anyway, that's pretty much what I had. Those are pretty well-known stories, but I thought it was interesting that those men got together back at the press club. Will anything happen because of it? Who knows? We'll see.
I have another news story really quick.
Okay. What you got?
The Inomachi district, which is about 3.5 hours north of Tokyo, has doubled down on its efforts to become the preeminent UFO hub in the universe.
Really?
Yeah.
How do you go about doing that?
Well, apparently the first thing you do is you create an international UFO lab, and they did that on June 24th of this year. The intent of it is to collect, analyze, and disclose information on sightings of unidentified flying objects around the world. You can join for up to 3 years at a time for, let's see, I think it was like 30,000 yen, 10,000
yen. Is that
like
$600 or something?
Yeah, 10,000 yen is right now about $90. About $90 a year. And as a member, you can receive special T-shirts, locally brewed sake, and you are eligible to attend UFO-related events. They opened it up on World UFO Day, which celebrates the first reported UFO sighting by a U.S. businessman in 1947, which we now know is not accurate.
Not accurate. Do you care to elaborate on that?
It's not the first UFO sighting in the world.
Well, of course it's not. I mean, there's been lights seen and the airship sightings, that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. But I think what you're referring to is the Kenneth Arnold sighting.
That's right.
In June of 1947, which kind of ushered in the modern UFO flying saucer era. Certainly there were other sightings, other reports before, but that's the one that kind of kicked everything off to get us where we are now, I would say. Wouldn't you say that when you think that's fair?
I would say that, but that's why we ended up with this New Zealand stories.
Right.
Because
that's how we got, that's what led us to New Zealand.
That's right.
But before we go there,
before we go there,
let's do a little, a little bit of business. Let's talk about the webpage. Quit showing me that Cthulhu doll, man. You're scaring me.
Is it creeping you out?
You're scaring me, Garth. The leprechaun. Thanks everyone for listening. We appreciate the support we've been getting lately. Been seeing more and more people visiting the shop, visiting our webpage, checking out our Facebook page and Instagram. So, look for us on all those things. And, if you like what you hear on the podcast, just rate and review. It does help other people find the show. Don't forget, when you go to cosmicsponge.com, like I said, check out the web store. But also there's the little to-go coffee cup in the upper right-hand corner that's called Buy Me a Coffee. You can click on that, and there's ways to help support the show, which, helps us keep this thing going. If you'd like to help us out, feel free to click that little icon. But even if you don't do that, check out our webpage. We got some fun stuff on there. On to tonight's story. Jimmy, you got anything else you want to do before we jump on to the New Zealand stories?
No, I'm not going to spell anything, so I'm ready.
Well, okay. Last week we had mentioned, I think Jimmy had said something about New Zealand pilot's story that we wanted to get into. But once we started researching that, we ran across several kind of unique things just from New Zealand. And so, we've got the pilot story, and we've got a couple other things here that we're going to talk about. So, Jimmy, I know you've done some legwork on this one. What you got on that New Zealand pilot story? Let's talk about that.
Let's go back in time to the... Stupid.
Long as we're on Wayne's World, why not?
Fair enough. So airships were all the rage in the late 19th and early 20th century. And this took place before airships themselves had been designed by inventors like von Zeppelin, for example. In 1909, there were hundreds of sightings in New Zealand being reported by witnesses. Then we have, going into the 1930s, an encounter with a flying saucer reported by Sir Francis Chichester. His name, I'm not going to spell it. And he's...
You wanted to, though, didn't you?
I did. So he had this encounter.
Go ahead and spell it.
I'm not doing it.
I won't make fun of you, I promise.
You will, too. He had an encounter with a flying saucer, which he revealed in his biography, The Lonely Sea in the Sky. He describes how he was alone somewhere over the Tasman Sea in his famous Gypsy Moth airplane.
Oh, yeah. You're
a big airplane guy. A Gypsy Moth airplane, can you describe what that looks like? I don't have a picture here.
Well, it's a biplane, and it was a two-seater, had one seat in the front, one in the back, and had very forgiving flight characteristics. They were really used quite a bit, even through World War II, as trainers because they were easy to fly.
No.
In those days, in the 1930s, if you wanted a private airplane, that was probably a very good choice. Easy to fly aircraft. Again, a biplane, two seats. One in front of the other, like a bicycle. Made for two.
But he was alone. So there's no one there to back him up. But he was well respected. And in those days, those guys that wore the necker, what are the scarves and the hats when they flew, they were taken seriously. So he says, when...
What does that have to do with anything, man?
I don't know. I mean, if you see a guy today who flies a plane, comes out and tells you some wild story, you're like, yeah, okay, whatever. But if you see a guy with a scarf and a really cool hat, from the 1930s.
The leather hat and the goggles.
Yeah. I take it more...
You know why they wear all that?
No.
Because it's it's an open cockpit.
Also gets
and it's
cold.
Freaking cold.
It gets cold up there, right?
You get up there, it's rather cold.
Yeah.
So
It's cold, but with the wind chill factor, it's...
Yeah, there you got that. You got the prop wash coming back on you too. So
Yeah, whatever that means. Okay, so When suddenly, he says, this is from his book, when suddenly, ahead and 30 degrees to the left, there were bright flashes in several places, like the dazzle of a heliograph. I saw a dull gray-white airship coming towards me. It seemed impossible, but I could have sworn it was an airship nosing towards me, like an oblong pearl. Except for a cloud or two, there was nothing else in the sky. I looked around, sometimes catching a flash or a glint, and turning again to look at the airship, I found that it had disappeared. I screwed up my eyes, unable to believe them, and twisted the seaplane this way and that, thinking that the airship must be hidden by a blind spot. Dazzling flashes continued in 4 or 5 different places, but I still could not pick out any planes. Then, out of some clouds to my right front, I saw another, or the same, airship advancing. I watched it intently, determined not to look away for a fraction of a second. I would see what would happen to this one in case I needed to chase it. It drew steadily closer, until perhaps a mile away when suddenly it vanished. Then it reappeared, close to where it had vanished. I watched with angry intentness. It drew closer, and I could see the dull gleam of light on its nose and on its back. It came on, but instead of increasing in size, it diminished as it approached. Then, quite near, it suddenly became its own ghost. 1 second, I could see through it, and the next, it had vanished. I decided it could be only a cloud, perfectly shaped like an airship and then dissolving. But it was uncanny that it should exactly resume in the same shape after it had once vanished. I turned towards the flashes, but those too had vanished. All this was many years before anyone spoke of flying saucers.
That's quite interesting.
So New Zealand has a very interesting history of UFOs, some of which mirrors our own. They had their own flap in 1952 of tons of...
Very, very busy year historically in the UFO community. That was the all-time busiest UFO, especially in the summer. That was whenever the lights were over Washington, D.C. and all that. 1952 was the peak of all UFO activity worldwide. Interestingly, before you move on, airships had actually been around a little bit longer than you think. I mean, you had balloons in the 1850s.
Mm-hmm, sure.
You saw, they were used in the U.S. Civil War. In 1852, 1863, Solomon Andrews flew an unpowered controllable dirigible in Perth Amboy, New Jersey. Let's see. The first one that was powered was in 1872. A French naval architect designed a large navigable balloon, which was driven by a large propeller turned by 8 men. So I'm just saying, you started seeing airships come around by the late 1800s, early 1900s. I mean, they were around, but probably not where this guy was flying. And if there would have been one there, they were still very rare. I'm sure someone would have known about it.
Yeah, this came from a book called UFO Whales, who refer to it as airships not coming out until... I wonder if maybe earlier in the book, I don't remember seeing it, it maybe refers to its meaning that airships came into wide use and in that particular shape and configuration. Were those earlier configurations like the Zeppelins we see on the front of the Led Zeppelin albums?
Right. Well, the Zeppelins were huge. They're very, very large, what's known as a rigid airship is what they designed, von Zeppelin. But now, smaller, still large in comparison to aircraft of the day, would have been a blimp or just an airship.
Right.
Now, those were relatively common in the 1930s, especially blimps, more along the size of, say, the Goodyear blimp or something like that.
That's still pretty big.
Much, not nearly as big as the old Zeppelins.
Well, sure, but I mean, it's big enough to,
But like I said, they were still in those days. It's especially the description of it didn't sound like just a blimp or a rigid airship. But the technology was there for them. But we'll do an episode on those turn of the century airships. There's some very fascinating stories and reports on those that I want to do in a future episode. So,
sure.
Did you have anything else over the...
I have one more UFO thing. I don't know if we want to tackle it now or later.
There was a New Zealand UFO wave of 1909. You heard about that one?
Yeah, that was the airship when I mentioned it earlier.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then
it still would have been very rare in 1909.
And then one of the best photographed, I did not know, actually videoed, UFO sightings happened in New Zealand in 1978 and was caught on film by an Australian film crew who was in the area trying to capture footage of them. It was evaluated by a optical physicist who discounted all of the other possible things that people thought it might be and said, no, this is something unusual in the sky. That is not any of the things, that have been proposed as like a conventional explanation for what they were saying.
Have you seen that film?
I did, and it looks like a lot of other films that I've seen with just shaky camera footage of lights in the sky. It was captured on radar as well, and they confirmed that there were no flights in the sky at the time. And it was 3 objects, one as big as a house.
Wow.
Yeah. So this came in 1978, and then someone came forward who had seen something similar in 1972. So I thought that was pretty interesting. And you can find this as the Kaikoura UFO mystery.
I'm going to visit something else in New Zealand. I'm going to go down the cryptid trail here.
Uh-oh.
This story, or this article, is on the webpage Paranormal New Zealand. And I've seen this as I was doing some research on New Zealand. I've seen this reference pop up in some other websites as well. But apparently they have a cryptid known as the Goatman.
Is he psychic?
Don't think he's psychic.
Psychic
It
Goatman.
doesn't say. I don't know. Let's get into it. Maybe he is.
Okay, Goatman, you say.
There are stories that travel far back into Maori folklore and forward to quite recently of a mysterious entity, half man, half goat, that has been encountered on lonely roads and outside of smaller towns all around the country. Most people will refer to this creature by a simple, straightforward name, Goatman, sometimes Hoofman. Who or what is this goat creature? Tales of goat-like creatures have circulated the globe for hundreds of years. They said they lurk on the outer boundaries of suburban regions, living but a few kilometers from residential zones.
Hey, I got a question. Do they mention whether or not they are good, or are they bad?
Let's just... Reports speak of them being around 7 to 8 feet tall, putrid smelling, covered in thick, matted fur, and rather vicious, sometimes clothed, sometimes naked, hairy, and very wild. Witnesses claim it has a goat-like head and moves about on either 2 or 4 legs, depending on the circumstances and the terrain. Much like the wondrous mythical creatures embedded in Greek mythology. I guess they're talking about a satyr. Goatman has been reported in many regions around New Zealand. The creature has been sighted along the desert road which runs past the camp region, leaping into the bush as cars approach. One reader told me his uncle claimed to have almost hit the creature in his old ute while driving the desert road back in the 1970s. The Waiawiki Gorge is another location of alleged Goatman appearances. These encounters in particular are said to be good omens.
Well, I have a question for you. If okay, in West Virginia, you and I probably know, I know some people, and I'm sure you do too, who eat roadkill.
I don't know anyone who eats roadkill,
I do.
Jimmy. You may know someone that eats roadkill. I do not.
I know some people who eat roadkill. Now, it depends on the condition. If it was recently hit, and there's some good meat there. I'm just saying, how do you feel about if you hit Goatman? Is he on the dinner menu, or is it something? No, it's just too much.
I think I'm just going to continue the story if you don't mind. So,
okay. Well, if anyone's out there who eats roadkill, let us know how you feel about Goatman.
He is sometimes known to step out to an approaching car asking for a lift, hence another of his given names, which is the hitchhiker. And this is a quote from someone. I'm not sure where this came from, but it says, "You stop and give him a lift, but just a short way up the road, he asks to get out," said one believer witness. "Sometimes he just disappears from the car, having safely gotten you past the stretch of road you were about to have an accident on. Just seeing him on a dangerous piece of road has avoided you from an accident about to happen, most probably right where he stood. I am told he is an ancestor who comes to warn of impeding bad news or traumatic events to come." One reader that wrote to me, I guess the author of the story, told of her great-grandparents talking about the man with horse hooves. They spoke of having seen him in Rotorua. Another witness says, we call him the hitchhiker. He is an old man whose car went over the bank. He pops up every so often, normally to help people who are having car troubles or hitchhikers who are lost. He even pops up in cars on the way.
Oh, this is still Goatman?
Still Goatman.
Okay. I thought you said he was like really tall.
I don't know. I mean, I'm just reading the story.
How's he fit in cars? And then if you got the horns, I mean, does he tear up the top?
I don't know. I mean, the graphic they show, he would definitely have trouble fitting in like a Kia or a Hyundai, I would say, like an Elantra or something.
Little smart car. So maybe he only gets in cars that have like a sunroof.
Either that or maybe, a
Hummer.
Yes, convertible, something like that.
Convertible, yeah.
Okay, so here's the... With another story, the hitchhiking theme. Okay, a strange-looking man in a trench coat hitchhiking on the Watui Saddle Road in the early hours in pitch black darkness. My uncle picked him up. He didn't say a word, just silence. As the truck headed on down the road towards Tarangi, the man thumped out on the door of the truck to be let off. When the truck came to a stop, the man jumped off the truck and disappeared into the night. My uncle said to me, all you heard was clip clop, clip clop.
Bye.
I think he jumped in the back of the truck. It didn't make that clear in the first part of the story.
Oh, I got it.
Somehow his lower half isn't distinguishable until he's in your car. He's very smelly. If you don't pick him up, something bad will happen. The legend was meant to be from around the Tapu region, but I've since heard others talking about him being as far up as Northland. It is unsure whether these creatures are solid flesh and blood, cryptids, interdimensional beings, aliens, ghosts, or just straight up urban myth. So the mystery continues. I think that's about all I've got on the Goatman.
No, nothing else on the Goatman, huh?
There's some other stuff on the Goatman, but let's just leave it there.
Do you have?
And that was an article by Mark Wallbank on the Paranormal New Zealand website. You got another story?
Not really. I mean, I did look a little bit at some of these cryptids that exist in New Zealand. There is a really large bird they call a moa.
Yeah, I've heard of the moa. It's pretty famous.
Yeah, they have a preserved foot of a moa they found near Queenstown in 1878, and it's held by the Natural History Museum in London. It is huge, and they have full skeletons that they've excavated. And these things were still around, up to 1,000 years ago, something like that. And there are some claims that even up to like the 1500s. Now, whether or not they were or was just legend or people, making wild claims, maybe they saw some other flightless bird. But these things look like an emu or an ostrich, but they stand about 12 to 14 feet tall. They were not meat eaters, as far as we know. If they were, they could take a human out in no time flat. They were hunted to extinction by the early Polynesian people, they believe. Yeah,
those flightless birds, were definitely around for millions of years. I guess descendants of the dinosaurs, those large flightless birds.
Yeah, now in 1993, hotel owner and well-known mountaineer Paddy Freeney claimed to have seen one in the Craigieburn Range in Authors Pass, Canterbury. His claim was that he and two other hikers spotted a 6-foot moa. Now that's like the size of maybe it was an ostrich that escaped from a zoo. Do they have ostriches in New Zealand?
No. They're not native to New Zealand. They're from Africa.
Yeah, so it could have escaped from a zoo, right?
Emus are Australian.
I don't know, but I've seen an emu in a zoo, like a drive-through zoo in Texas. And
I had one
creepy.
Bite my hand one time.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Did it hurt?
No, not really. It just kind of frightened me.
Yeah, they're frightening looking, right?
Well, it was a big, tall bird, and we're at this zoo where you go in and you're pretty close to the animals. Anyway, there's the emu. It was like behind some chicken wire or something like that, and I put some bird feed. I think you could. I don't remember. It's been years ago, and I think you could feed some of the animals a little bit of things here and there. And I put some out in my hand, and it just like took its whole beak and like wrapped it around my hand. Kind of freaked me out a little bit. My wife got a kick out of it.
Did you know the native people of New Zealand, the Maori Polynesian tribe, they call the North Island Aotearoa. On that island, on the North Island, there are stories going way back of. Can you guess who? He has really big feet. That's my only clue.
Bigfoot?
Yes. A big...
Or the Yeti?
Well, Bigfoot, Yeti, Sasquatch. Who
I don't know.
knows?
The Yeti, though. Does the Yeti have big feet? I think we established last time that the Yeti foot wasn't that big.
Yeah, I mean, I think Nike
It's not
probably
like Bigfoot.
Nike probably makes shoes that size, for some of the NBA players. Some of those
Right.
guys have really big feet. Yeah, they have their own version, the Maho or the Maro. They're described as giants, these large, wild men, furry, very violent cannibals. They had long, bony fingers with sharp fingernails. We've heard these stories from Native Americans as well. They kill and eat humans and other animals, and they really hate the Maori.
Yeah, it's so strange how all these wild man stories are everywhere.
Yeah.
On every continent.
And yet, we don't have any bones. We don't have any...
Well,
we have no real evidence. It's interesting, though, right?
I think so.
Anyway, they really hate the Maori because they displaced them from their regular homes and they ran them off up into the mountains where they still live to this day, apparently. They forcing them to dwell in inhospitable alpine regions. So that's a pretty scary looking thing. And you can look at pictures of them if you look them up. And they're like the very, very scary version, the anti-Harry and the Hendersons Bigfoot look.
Harry and the Hendersons. Maybe it'd be like Colin and the Hendersons or Ian.
This one picture looks like this guy's on meth. He's got really big wide eyes. He's got creepy long fingernails. It's terrifying looking.
What do they call that thing?
The Myro. M-A... I'm not doing it. You almost got me. But yeah, you can look it up. They're scary looking. And they even say that the Europeans ran into them when they came to the islands and had to fight them off from time to time.
Let's not leave out the paranormal of New Zealand. I have a list of the reportedly most haunted places in New Zealand. Are you interested in that?
It depends on how scary they are.
Well, I'm just going to do a quick rundown.
Hey, wait a minute. I actually vaguely remember somebody telling me recently, I'm pretty sure it's in New Zealand, that oversetting, like on the cliff of the ocean, of course, I mean, it's an island nation, so it's not hard to find there. There was an asylum that looked really creepy and spooky that some pretty horrific things happened at, including...
It's on the list.
Oh, is it? Cool. That's the one I want you to talk about because there was, I think they told me there was a fire and it killed just about all the women in this one area of the thing, and it was really horrible. I think a couple women might have escaped, but I'm not sure.
That would be the Seacliff Lunatic Asylum in Otago, region of Elsewhere.
What do we know about it?
The Seacliff Lunatic Asylum, or Seacliff Asylum, later known as the Seacliff Mental Hospital, was a psychiatric hospital in Seacliff, New Zealand. When built in the late 19th century, it was the largest building in the country, noted for its scale and extravagant architecture. It became infamous for construction faults, resulting in a partial collapse, as well as in 1942 a fire which destroyed a wooden outbuilding, claiming 37 lives, and some sources say 39 lives, because the victims were trapped in a locked ward. The site is now divided between Truby King Recreation Reserve, where most of the old buildings have been demolished, and most of the area remains dense woodland, and privately owned land where several of the smaller hospital buildings have been renovated completely. Seacliff is claimed to be haunted by former patients of what was the country's biggest building at the time.
Oh, that could be a spooky place we can visit when we go to New Zealand.
Right. We'll just hop on the old Cosmic Sponge Learjet and head right down there.
That's what I'm thinking. We can even stay in the Cosmic Sponge Hotel in New Zealand. But I'm not going to get in the Cosmic Sponge van because that thing scares me.
Oh, well.
Bad transmission. Brakes don't work. We spend our little money on the plane.
Yeah, in 1942, a fire broke out in Ward 5 of the hospital. It was a 2-story wooden structure added to the original construction, holding 41, according to some sources, female patients.
The number keeps going up.
Well, that was the deaths. Maybe a few got out.
Yeah.
All patients had been locked in their rooms or into the 20-bed dormitory, partially because World War II had caused a nursing staff shortage. Checks were made only once an hour. After the fire was noticed by a male attendant, A hospital's firefighters tried to extinguish the flames with water from a close-by hydrant, while 2 women were saved from the rooms because they did not have locked shutters. However, the flames were too strong, and after an hour, the ward was reduced to ashes. Although the fire was kept from spreading to the other buildings, all patients who remained in Ward 5 are thought to have died from suffocation or smoke inhalation. And that is who they say haunts the site to this day.
Do they know what?
Very little of it remains now.
Right. Do they know what started the fire?
It doesn't say. Just says the fire broke out.
Mystery.
Probably smoking. Everyone smoked in the 40s.
Right. So you said it was one of the biggest, if not the biggest building at the time. My question is, does that mean just a large portion of the population in New Zealand at the time were lunatics? I mean, they said it was a lunatic asylum.
It had 500 beds.
How many people were in New Zealand at the time? Like 501? I mean, I don't know history.
Obviously.
Shush.
It was closed in 1973, opened in 1884.
That's a long run.
Yeah.
Yeah, I saw a picture of it a while back, and it looked really pretty cool. Mm-hmm. Very creepy.
So what else you got for New Zealand? I mean, there's a ton of these things we can jump on. I like the Goatman.
The Goatman is priceless. There was one where they were talking about a cryptid that they thought was the Bigfoot cryptid, but they gave it a new name, and I think it was less violent. I guess they sort of determined it was a escaped gorilla. Yeah, well, did you know that the Maori had their own tradition of vampires?
No, I'm interested to know what that is.
Well, I can't say the word because it's got like 23 consonants and about twice as many vowels.
Yeah.
Yeah, but they're fairy-like creatures of the forest and mountaintops. And although they had some human attributes, they were regarded not as people, but as supernatural beings. They had light skin and red or fair hair. There's still debate about their height. Some early tribe records say that they were small, similar in size to humans. Other tribes claim them to be giants, more than 2 meters tall. The South Island traditions have them living mainly in the hills around Lyttelton Harbor, Akora, and the Takatimu Range, and in the hills between the Arahura River and Lake Bruner. Their society was similar to the Maori society, and they were hunters and gatherers, surviving on raw forest foods and sometimes fishing from the shores of the lake. Now, I don't know why they say they were like vampires, other than they're sometimes described as sea fairies with red hair and white skin and fingers with long, evil claws. And they spent their days under the sea, coming out onto land only at night. They feared sunlight and fire.
Well, who doesn't fear fire? I mean, come on.
Well, yeah, I mean, maybe
I have a story. This one also is by Mark Walbank on Paranormal New Zealand. Mm-hmm. This story is called Ghosts at the River's Convergent. There are stories that tell of a lonely figure of a person standing on a bridge that overlooks the intersecting Pui Pui and Heipuku rivers near Kaikoura. There have been numbers of deaths in this region through the early years of the 1900s up until now. More recently, from river drownings to motor vehicle tragedies along this lengthy strip of New Zealand State Highway, which snakes its way down the South Island east coast. The Pui Pui River is a river of the Marlborough region. It flows southwest, roughly paralleling the Pacific Ocean, from its source 12 kilometers west of the mouth of the Clarence River, and reaches its outflow into the Heipuku River 5 kilometers from the latter's mouth of the Heipuku. Drivers along this bridge have reported a figure, possibly a woman, in white, standing alone on the bridge in the darkness, looking mournfully out towards the river. Hikers and cyclists traversing this area heard what sounds like voices of someone calling out. A story from a local fisherman sitting on the bank one day, seeing what he claimed was a person crossing the river from left to right. However, the river level had recently increased due to the recent heavy rain, and there was no way a person could have just walked across it at that point. The most unusual part of this description was that the figure was apparently walking at about knee depth, where at the level of the water should have been well over their head. An impossible crossing at that time, according to the witness. The figure disappeared from view when reaching the other side. Could this be the ghost of someone who drowned in the river?
Maybe they were standing on somebody else's shoulders as they were crossing the river.
Could be.
It's very mysterious.
Anyway, there's a lot of haunted stuff. There's a lot of paranormal stuff in New Zealand, and we just really scratched the surface here on a lot of stories.
I would love to go. They shot the Lord of the Rings movies there. Some of them. Some of it,
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it looks like beautiful country. Well, what do you say? You got any more stories you want to do?
No.
Like I said, we've barely scratched the surface here. We decided, since Jimmy's pilot story didn't quite fill up a whole show, we decided, hey, let's add a few more stories to the UFO sighting. So we decided to just kind of look at a little overview of some of the things, paranormal, encrypted, and UFO events that have happened in New Zealand.
I'd love to go to New Zealand. It's my number one bucket list place to visit.
Nice. Yeah, I would like to go that way as well.
Yeah. You know what they call the people there? They call them Kiwis.
And I saw a website here that said something, which I didn't read any stories off of it, but they called it Kiwi cryptids.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah. So anyway, I think we're going to wrap up the show here. Just like to remind everyone to please rate and review wherever you listen to the podcast. It helps other people find the show. If you'd like to reach out to the show and send us an email, if you have a story you'd like to share, you can reach us at firstcontact@cosmicsponge.com. Be sure to check out our website. We have the web store and also the icon where you can support the show, which is called the Buy Me a Coffee icon. Don't forget Facebook and Instagram. We typically like to post news stories on Facebook, and including one of the stories I covered tonight on Facebook. We update it as much as we can. Usually try to do it at least once a day. Hey, Jimmy, you got anything else?
Yeah, you know where I'm going this weekend?
Don't I?
I'm going to visit the Trans-Allegheny Mental Hospital.
Oh, that's right. You're doing that haunted hospital thing.
Yeah, they have it just about an hour south of here in Weston, West Virginia. Never been. I told somebody that I'm going to the Trans-Allegheny Mental Hospital. He says, well, it's about time they put you somewhere. It's like, oh, man.
Yeah. Oh, and before I forget, next week we are going to have author Wendy Fadan on the show, and she has her very own extraordinary story to tell. So please tune in next week. We'll be interviewing Wendy, and she'll take part in the show. We're going to be talking about mediums and spirits.
Yeah, I think she did some research on that with some real mediums, right?
For her latest book.
That's right.
We'll get into that next week. So I guess with all that out of the way, this is Stephen Hawk signing out, and I'll see you next week.
And Jimmy Coe, keep your eyes to the skies and your feet on the ground. See you next week.
Is that your kiwi?
That's my kiwi. That's my little kiwi. This is my kiwi. He's universal.
Really doll out of my face.
In your face. That's all for this week's episode of Cosmic Sponge. Please don't forget to rate and review us wherever you listen. It helps others find the show. If you have any questions or have a story you'd like to share, you can contact us using our email account, firstcontact@cosmicsponge.com. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next week.